Ancient Rome, one of the greatest superpowers in history, whose far-reaching legacy continues to shape our lives.
For close on 1,000 years, the Romans dominated the known world. Theirs was an extraordinary empire that heralded an age of unprecedented prosperity and stability, but that also ruled through violence and oppression.
Rome's rise to greatness wasn't inevitable. Its epic history was often decided by single critical moments.
In this series, I'm exploring 8 key days that I believe help to explain Rome's remarkable success.
To understand the full significance of these 8 days, I'm travelling across the Roman world.
I am incredibly lucky to get access to this archaeological site.
Examining remarkable finds.
The Germans are described by Caesar as a kind of terrorists.
And investigating the complexities of what it was to be Roman.
Pompey and I had an agreement.
This is the day in 49 BC when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River at the head of his all-conquering army. It was the start of a bloody revolution.
Cicero, join the liberators.
That would lead to the destruction of Rome's 500-year-old republic. Gaius Julius Caesar was born just a few hundred yards from here in 100 BC, at a time when Rome still referred to herself as a republic. Now, the Romans were very proud of their ideal of liberty, and that, as a republic, her citizens had both a voice and a vote. Rule was, in theory at least, for the people. Assemblies and elections were open to ordinary citizens, but the powerful Senate was dominated by a few elite families. As a republic, Rome had gone from strength to strength. By the 1st century BC, Rome was the most powerful state in the ancient world. Her empire now stretched from what is now Greece and Turkey in the east, across North Africa to Spain in the west. She defeated her great rival Carthage.
Victory!
And overcome a slave revolt led by Spartacus. But Rome's victories came at a price. Her lust for land led to the rise of army generals who could deliver foreign conquests. Enriched by plunder, these men accumulated dangerous amounts of power. And one stood head and shoulders above the rest. As a general and statesman, Julius Caesar was in a class of his own. A man said to have razor-sharp intellect and a clinical, steely ambition to succeed.
Caesar's rise would challenge the very existence of the Republic itself. At this crucial moment in Rome's history, the city had a stark choice: to stay true to its principles of rule by the many, or to stand by and watch as power was subverted for the benefit of the few. These growing tensions would reach a crisis point on what would prove to be a momentous day, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, declaring war on the Republic itself. I want to explore the events around that day, a moment that would herald the transformation of the Republic into an empire ruled by a single man.
Caesar first made his name and his fortune when he led the pitiless invasion of Gaul, a bloody military campaign that reached a terrible climax in today's Netherlands, when Germanic tribes crossed into Caesar's newly conquered territory. What followed was one of the most vicious mass killings in Roman history. In Caesar's account of the Gallic Wars, he writes that the Germanic tribes begged him for a truce. Instead, he ordered that they be wiped out. A task his soldiers carried out with ruthless savagery. At Caesar's side, his loyal officer, Mark Antony.
These representatives of the people have come to talk peace.
We'll have to disappoint them then, won't we?
Run! Run into the forest!
Caesar boasted that his troops annihilated the tribes, killing around 150,000 men, women, and children. Up until now, historians have had to rely on Caesar's written account as the only proof for this horrifying episode.
Remarkably, archaeologists working here in the Netherlands believe they may have identified direct evidence of the events that day, and some of the key finds are being held here in the National Museum in Leiden.
This newly discovered, chilling evidence was dredged from the nearby Maas River and analysed by archaeologist Nico Roymans.
What kind of evidence have you been working with to piece together this story?
Here you have a few examples. You have here a skull of an adult person about 60 years old, where the face here was cut off by one sword blow. So that's really a mortal injury, I can tell you.
Yeah, that's horrific, isn't it?
Here, an adult woman with a hole here above the one of the eyes caused by a Roman spearhead.
I mean, it's interesting that you're finding women here because we hear from the accounts that women and children were also slaughtered.
That's exactly what Caesar describes, that he tried to slaughter the complete population.
I mean, historically, this is very exciting because it's very rare that we get archaeological evidence like this, absolutely buttressing in a very precise way the written record. But emotionally, it's very hard to look at some of this because you get a sense of the ferocity of Caesar and his campaign.
What he did here in this northern fringe area of Gaul, there was clear cases of massacres and even genocide.
Finds like these should make us redraw our mental picture of Caesar. As well as being an ambitious and brilliant general, he was a brutal and callous warlord.
Today, he'd be called a war criminal. He destroyed hundreds of towns and settlements, enslaved and killed hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions of Gauls.
What Caesar wanted was personal power and glory, setting him on a direct collision course with the ideals of the Roman Republic. Rome's overseas conquests had produced a new breed of general. Men whose enormous personal influence threatened to destabilize the entire system of Roman government. 3 in particular were hungry for power, and the foremost amongst them was the conqueror of Gaul, Julius Caesar. A state whose politics was supposed to be played out in the public spaces and buildings of the Forum was about to have its future threatened by a sleazy backroom deal. "170 miles north of the capital, Rome's 3 most powerful citizens met to launch a conspiracy to divide up control of the vast Roman Empire. Calling the shots, Caesar himself. Before him, Crassus, commander who defeated Spartacus and the richest man in Rome. Pompey the Great, a brilliant general, conqueror of the East,
and husband to Caesar's daughter, Julia.
Spain for you, Pompey.
Syria for you, Crassus.
Syria.
More triumphs. More trophies. More gold, Crassus.
He doesn't need more gold.
You don't need any more triumphs.
And for you, Caesar?
The extension of my governorship of Gaul. 5 more years. Supported by fresh finance from the Senate.
The stubborn old dogs in the Senate will fight it.
The stubborn old dogs of the Senate will be no match for the 3 of us.
This was a power grab, a plan to seize control of the Republic. 3 of the richest men in Rome, each at the head of a battle-hardened army, working together to further their own interests. Truly the stuff of nightmares for the old order in the Senate. Now, there's a rather brilliant thing about the situation here, because we have an eyewitness right at the heart of the Roman political system. His name was Marcus Tullius Cicero, and he wasn't just any old observer, but an incredibly astute and prolific commentator. Thanks to his speeches and his hundreds of letters, we know what was going on at the actual time that it was happening. Cicero came from obscure beginnings, here in Arpino, some 60 miles south of Rome. Despite the way he's been portrayed in this statue, Cicero wasn't a conquering hero. He was a lawyer and a politician, although he was widely regarded as the very best orator in the whole of Rome. But his political instincts were very conservative. The values of the Republic meant everything to him. He was also astute enough to know that politics was a dangerous game. Violence was a constant threat from mobs loyal to Caesar and his allies. Oppose Caesar, Pompey or Crassus, and you risked intimidation or sometimes even assassination. It was something that Cicero had experienced firsthand when his beloved home in Rome was ransacked by a hostile mob. So Cicero felt forced to pledge his loyalty to the 3 generals. But what is fascinating is that if you read his private letters, then these reveal his real, heartfelt fears for the future. He writes in the summer of 56 BC to his friend Atticus, "You will not believe the treachery of these, our leaders, as they would have themselves. Farewell to straight, true, honest politics." But the Gang of Three's power-sharing plot was short-lived. The great Crassus might have beaten Spartacus, but out on campaign against the Parthian Empire, he was defeated in battle. 30,000 of his soldiers were lost, and the general himself was taken prisoner.
Are you thirsty, Rome?
Legends about the use of molten gold to murder the infamously wealthy Crassus were recorded by the Roman historian Cassius Dio. With Crassus gone, the Gang of Three's deal was dead in the water.
Caesar acted swiftly to shore up his power, putting himself forward for the highest political office in Rome, the consulship. But there was a problem. In order to run for office, Roman law stated that a general must give up command of his armies.
The agreement that had been thrashed out down there in the heart of Rome by the citizens of the Republic was that a candidate had to be a civilian. The thing was, Caesar had absolutely no intention of giving up the source of his power, his position as general in command of a loyal army.
Seeking to build support for his candidacy, Caesar needed the endorsement of a senior senator.
Cicero! My dear friend.
So he summoned Rome's greatest orator to his military headquarters in Ravenna, then part of southern Gaul.
Don't go upsetting him, you old dog, or you'll have me to answer to.
You wish to be elected consul in the upcoming elections?
Yes. My governorship of Gaul is coming to an end.
But you want to keep your armies? I don't think that would be acceptable to the Senate.
The Senate seems determined to punish and humiliate me for bringing glory to Rome.
The law would have to be rewritten.
Rewrite it, then. Why not? They follow you like sheep.
Your opponents rise to their feet every day to declare you an enemy of the Senate and of Rome itself. They are trying their best to turn Pompey round to their side.
Pompey and I had an agreement. I cannot be left defenseless. I simply ask to be treated with the respect due to my rank and experience.
I will see what I can do.
I think you'll find it the safest and most honorable path.
Despite Cicero's pledge of support, Caesar's enemies in the Senate denied his request to keep his armies, arguing instead that he be stripped of his command in Gaul.
The story goes that when Caesar heard that the Senate planned to cancel his command, he clapped his hand to the hilt of his sword and declared, "This will give it to me." Big talk was edging closer to the possibility of outright war between Caesar and the Senate.
So, where did Pompey, the other surviving member of the Gang of Three, stand on all of this? He had tried to remain on good terms with both Caesar and the Senate. Now, with the Republic in crisis, he'd have to pick a side.
Cicero was following all of this closely from one of his villas outside Rome. His letters give us a unique insight into history as it happened, and as events escalated towards chaos, they grow ever more despairing. In the winter of 50 BC, he was writing almost daily to his friend Atticus. Just listen to this from early December. "These men are fighting for personal power at society's risk. Caesar's become so strong that all hope of resistance rests with a single citizen, meaning Pompey. And soon after that, on December the 18th, he is crystal clear about Rome's fate. The political situation gives me greater terror every day. All we want is peace, but a victory may produce a tyrant." Cicero was desolate, with a front row seat as Rome geared up for civil war. A war that would destroy the Republic that he so loved.
Just a few days after that letter, matters came to a head.
The Senate asked Pompey to defend the Republic with arms if necessary. Forced to make a decision, he accepted, and a state of emergency was declared. Caesar was then ordered to relinquish his military command and to return to the city without his army.
Caesar was now faced with a critical dilemma. To remain in Gaul meant forfeiting his political power to his enemies. Returning to Rome without an army would verge on the suicidal. The only other option was one that would have devastating consequences. From his base in Ravenna, Caesar planned to travel through the night to meet his army at the Rubicon River, the frontier with the Roman homeland. According to the law, any general leading troops across this border would be declared a public enemy. Crossing the Rubicon would be, quite simply, a declaration of war against the Republic of Rome. Secrecy was paramount.
Not a word to anyone, or I'll come to that filthy little hovel of yours and slit your throat. Understand? Good.
The choice that Caesar would make on the banks of the Rubicon River the following morning changed the course of history.
If you'd like to experience the sights of this ancient city for yourself, we're offering you the chance to win 5 nights in Rome for 2 people. You'll stay in the heart of the city at the Hotel Boscolo. An expert guide will take you on a private tour, exploring Rome's incredible sights, including the Colosseum, the Roman Forum, and Palatine Hill. There'll be a dinner at rooftop restaurant Ambrosia, and will include £500 spending money. So to enter, text Rome to 65515. Or call 0904 161 0505. Or post your name and phone number to Rome, PO Box 7557, Derby DE1 0MP. Text costs £1.50 plus 1 message at standard network rate. Calls cost £1.50 plus your network access charge. Lines close at midday on the date shown on screen and 3 working days later for postal entries. For rules, go to channel5.com/win.
Caesar's conflict with the Senate had reached crisis point. He rode through the night to meet up with his army at the Rubicon, the border with the Roman homeland. If Caesar crossed the Rubicon at the head of his army, it would be an act of treason, an open violation of Roman law. This would trigger a devastating civil war between Caesar and the Republic. If he turned back, he'd lose his command and be tried as a traitor.
Did
You passed out. I had to haul you out with the river like a fish.
I saw a figure. A woman. Rising out of the water. She told me to go no further.
A dream? They're here.
Say no more of this.
The Ortholeucan story of this ghostly vision, as Caesar stood on the threshold of all-out rebellion, speaks of the troubled state of his mind. The decision that Caesar would make on that day would transform the fate of the Roman Empire.
Soldiers of the 13th, loyal friends, I have been your commander for 9 years. We meet here today on the banks of the Rubicon because the Senate and Pompey have decreed that unless I relinquish my command, I shall be branded an enemy of Rome. Gaius Julius Caesar, an enemy of Rome! How dare they! Now we have a choice. We turn back, or we cross this river and we fight against my enemies to prove my honor and my station. What is it to be, men?
On the 10th of January, 49 BC, Julius Caesar urged his horse into the icy waters of the Rubicon River. This apparently simple act would set off a chain of events that would come to define the Roman Empire. Even now, crossing a Rubicon means reaching a point of no return, an act with permanent consequences. Caesar had started a civil war, and that decision would shape the course of Roman civilization, which means that its fallout still impacts on all of us today. For Cicero, whatever he intended, and whoever won these battles, the real loser could only be the 500-year-old Republic. We should have resisted Caesar when he was weak. That would have been easy. Now we face 11 legions, cavalry at his command, the city rabble, corrupt youth. A leader of such authority and daring, against this we must either fight or admit his candidature in the law. And then he comes up with something really interesting. Better fight than be a slave, you say? For what? A death sentence if you're beaten. And if you win, slavery all the same. What Cicero is saying is that because this is a civil war, everything is already lost. Legitimate political power cannot be won by the sword. And if Pompey triumphed, there was nothing to say that he wouldn't end up being a tyrant. Death or moral slavery would be the only outcome. An epic showdown loomed. Caesar marched south from the Rubicon to Rome. But Pompey and his supporters abandoned the city, fleeing to Greece, where they raised a huge army. Caesar sailed east to meet them, and the two sides finally confronted one another at the decisive Battle of Pharsalus. Facing Pompey's forces on the plains of central Greece, Caesar found himself in a perilous position. Isolated, short of provisions, and seriously outnumbered. But then Caesar's men, battle-hardened veterans, employed superior strategy and fighting skills and defied military logic to win Caesar his greatest victory.
After this crushing defeat, Pompey went on the run, fleeing to Egypt. Caesar pursued him there, hoping to persuade the Egyptian king, Ptolemy, to hand over his great adversary.
Conqueror of the world and mightiest of the Romans, you are made safe by this gift.
How is this a gift?
It is your enemy's ring and his head.
This is the head of a great general, a consul of Rome, and my son-in-law.
Tell your king, I demand that the assassins of this great man be executed without delay!
Caesar's reaction to Pompey's death might seem strange, but it could be put down to his anger at a missed opportunity. Rather than have his enemies killed, he preferred to offer them mercy or clemency, proving the reach of his power and persuading people to his side.
Whether Caesar's mercy was sincere or just for show, with Pompey dead, there was no doubt he had absolute power. Cicero was one of the many who publicly praised him for his willingness to forgive. But in truth, he held out little hope for Rome under Caesar's rule. In the security of his private correspondence, Cicero wrote, "Liberty has been lost."
In 46 BC, when Caesar finally returned to Rome, the Senate granted him a triumph, a glorious procession into the city. The Romans always loved a military parade, and it's no different today. Caesar's victory appeared to be complete.
The newly tamed Senate awarded Caesar with powers and honours unheard of in the history of the Republic. Titles like Prefect of the Morals and Father of the Fatherland. They even gave him his own religious cult, where he was worshipped as a kind of demigod. Then, in 44 BC, his birthday was declared a public holiday, and the month of Quintilis was renamed Julius, July after him.
But Caesar was walking a dangerous path. To many observers, he seemed to be behaving like a king. And since the founding of the Republic, the Romans had a deep hatred of kings and tyrants.
Otherwise, it's good.
Underground opposition to Caesar's autocratic rule was growing. And ancient writers tell us that Caesar was plagued with a mystery illness that further threatened to undermine his authority. Plutarch describes Caesar as suffering from distemper in the head. Suetonius writes of sudden fainting fits and nightmares.
Caesar, might we have a brief audience?
Cicero, Brutus. What have you come to say?
Caesar, dictator, hear my petition.
Will he not stand to speak to senators?
Perhaps Caesar thinks we should all kneel before him, like subjects.
Unaware of Caesar's illness, the senators were greatly offended by his failure to stand. They saw it as an insult to their rank and evidence of his desire to rule as their king.
Well, do you have something to say?
According to Plutarch, Caesar later claimed his failure to rise was due to his sickness, causing his senses to be speedily shaken and whirled about.
Caesar's curious behaviour was great ammunition for his opponents. Some ancient sources blamed his growing arrogance on his recurrent seizures, and that idea has been dismissed as just a convenient excuse. But intriguing new research is now casting light on the relationship between Caesar's health and his behaviour.
Dr. Hutan Ashrafian has applied modern medical knowledge to the symptoms of Caesar's illness. Symptoms that we know about entirely from descriptions in historical accounts.
Clearly, as a successful general, Julius Caesar was healthy for most of his life, but he started suffering from some symptoms of falling and headaches, and this has been brought down to us over the years as having suffered from epilepsy.
Why did you have a problem with epilepsy? Why did you think that was unlikely?
Epilepsy is a disease that typically presents in childhood, but what we know from Julius Caesar was that he was healthy for most of his life, and then suddenly in middle age he has these diseases, and that's highly unusual and doesn't fit in with the story of epilepsy. It fits much better, actually, with the disease of the furrowing up of the arteries going to the brain, or cerebrovascular disease.
And what would be the symptoms of that?
So typically the symptoms of cerebrovascular disease are weakness in a limb, blindness temporarily, it could be difficulty in hearing, it could be a difficulty of balance, and very rarely it could be even having visions.
And that's very interesting. Do you think that is actually affecting Caesar then, that kind of history is being played out because he's got this particular medical condition?
I think so, because in Julius Caesar's case, he became quite emotionally unstable towards the end of his life, and this was described in several sources.
If Caesar really did think he was dying, or was spurred on by a kind of enhanced sense of recklessness, then he could well have wanted to try to secure his legacy. And it seems as though that was exactly what he was trying to do. He kicked off a massive building programme, rebranding the city of Rome. He ordered up a whole new Senate house, the Curia Julia, and even a new forum, the Forum Julium. And right at its centre, he built this massive temple to Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother, declaring to the Roman world that this was the goddess who was the ancestor of his family. Then, in 44 BC, just a few days after he'd failed to stand for the senators, Caesar made himself dictator for life, a king in all but name.
Rome's republic had been replaced by a military dictatorship. The Senate had been systematically stripped of its powers. Its ranks swelled with Caesar's loyal supporters. 5 years after Caesar crossed the Rubicon, a small group of senators now decided that he'd gone too far, and what they did next would reverberate through history.
Experience the ancient city for yourself with a chance to win a 5-night trip for 2 to Rome. You'll stay at the Hotel Boscolo with a private tour of Rome's incredible sights, a rooftop dinner and £500. So to enter, text Rome to 65515 or call 0904 161 0505 or post your name and phone number to Rome, PO Box 7557, Derby, DE1 0MP. For rules, go to channel5.com/win.
In 44 BC, 5 years after he crossed the Rubicon, Caesar was established as dictator for life. For some, yearning for the liberties of the Republic, Caesar had proved himself a power-mad tyrant. A small group of senators now decided they had to act.
I hope this won't be another waste of time.
On the Ides of March, Cicero attended a meeting of the Senate, unaware that inside, Caesar's fate had been sealed.
Liberty has been recovered. We are free. Join the liberators.
When Caesar had entered the chamber, he was surrounded by around 20 conspirators who stabbed him to death. In the autopsy afterwards, doctors counted 23 wounds on his body. The murder of Gaius Julius Caesar took place here, right at the heart of Pompey's massive theatre complex. It was a messy business, with the conspirators slashing one another in the confusion. Those who physically had Caesar's blood on their hands were closely connected to the dictator. Casca, who struck first, was an old friend. Marcus Brutus was the son of a long-standing mistress, and Decimus Brutus was a cousin, as well as others who'd been personally forgiven by Caesar for their allegiance to Pompey. But all these personal histories were put aside in a frantic bid to murder their master and to restore the Republic and its values. For Caesar's enemies, he'd come to represent everything that they'd been brought up to fear and to despise. He was a tyrant, an all-powerful dictator, an enemy of the Republic, an enemy of the idea that was Rome. Cicero had spent most of Caesar's tyranny either praising the dictator or sulking in semi-retirement. But with Caesar's murder, he sprang back into life. He didn't actually go and join the murderers when they regrouped on Capitoline Hill, but he did write this to one of them. "Congratulations. I rejoice. I love you and have your interests at heart." And then he later added, "How I wish that you'd invited me to that splendid feast on the Ides of March. There would have been no leftovers." By which he meant that he'd have made sure that Mark Antony and Caesar's other supporters had also been killed. Later, he wrote justifying the murder, describing tyranny as a crime punishable by death, a crime against humanity. Through history, Caesar's name would be taken by despots and imperial leaders across the world, from Roman Caesars to Russian Tsars and German Kaisers. And the story of his rise and fall reflects a battle that still rages today, wherever democracy, with all its flaws, is pitted against tyranny. In the days and weeks after Caesar's murder, Cicero and others worked hard to restore the Republic, to avoid more violence, but it was too late. Caesar's followers whipped up a hunger for revenge and chased his assassins from the city. Soon, Rome was in the grip of yet another brutal civil war. All this violence stemmed from one pivotal moment when Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC. It was an act that ensured the destruction of the Roman Republic and the downfall of some of its greatest figures. Within just 10 years, Pompey, Brutus, Caesar, Cato, Cicero had been killed or committed suicide. Murder begat murder. Civil war begat civil war. A point of no return really had been crossed. Next time, the day that Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, triumphed over his rival Mark Antony and was acclaimed Augustus, the first emperor of Rome.
Rome, still mourning the death of Julius Caesar, will not be prepared, nor will it see you coming.
Don't miss all that new next Friday at 9. And we're back in Rome again tonight, unearthing the scandalous history of one of its oldest institutions. Conspiracy digs deep into the Roman Catholic Church in Murder at the Vatican. Next.